Hi, Graphic Design 1. We're going to do our first Illustrator assignment. So our focus today is going to be to learn how to use shapes mostly, along with some other basic Illustrator tools. So this is the goal of what we're going to be making today. However, first we need to get started with how to open our Adobe products. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on that little Windows icon in the bottom right-hand corner, and you're going to look for the application that says Adobe Creative Cloud. So this is how we're going to be accessing our different applications in class. When you do this, you're going to want to make sure to sign in using your school email address. So when you first click on the Creative Cloud app, it's going to ask you immediately to sign in, but the way that you can double check is that you can click on this little like pie thing here in the corner and just double check that this is your school email address that you're signed in with. So we have access to the entire Adobe suite, but we're going to be focusing mainly on Illustrator and Photoshop. So when you're in the Creative Cloud desktop workspace, you're just going to go ahead and click open on whatever program you're wanting to work in. So I'm going to open Illustrator. When you do this, you want to make sure to just let your computer think about it. So if you click open and then you click on a bunch of other stuff trying to like get it to go faster, I promise it's just going to make it go slower. So after you click open on a program, just let it think about its life and it will open eventually. Okay. So now that we have Illustrator open, we're going to go ahead and click on new file, this blue button over here. Okay, so when we're creating in Adobe Illustrator, we're going to be making things in a vector-based program. So vector is different than pixel-based. For example, if you're working in Photoshop, you're working in a pixel-based program, because vector can be scaled up and down without getting distorted because it doesn't have that same problem of resolution that Photoshop has. Photoshop has a particular number of pixels per inch that cause it to have a specific resolution that could get distorted if you zoom in too far. But that problem does not exist in Illustrator. So first thing when we open this new document, you're going to change the title. So the title is always going to be your last name underscore and then whatever it is that we're making that day. So for today, we're going to be using shapes to make a castle. So we're going to title this with your last name underscore shape castle. Okay. Then we're going to make sure that the measurement that we're using is inches. Sometimes this preset might be points, but we don't know how to measure in points. Points is something that Illustrator uses to figure out how to scale it. That scalable vector situation that I was just talking about, that is measured in points. But we don't know how to measure in points. We know how to measure in inches. Okay, so we're going to make it 12 by 12 inches. Down here, you also have a couple of options for different color modes that you can use. So there are two options. There's RGB and CMYK. RGB stands for red, green, blue, and those are the colors that your computer monitor emits in order to make all of the colors that you're seeing on your screen right now. So depending on the percentage of red, green, and blue that's being shown on your computer screen through the little LEDs or through the little lights that are in your monitor, that's how it makes those colors. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So CMYK are the colors that you buy for ink in your printer. So if your artwork has any potential to be printed, you should be making it with CMYK color. If your artwork is only going to exist digitally, then you could use RGB color. So let's go ahead and change that to RGB because we're just going to make it digitally. And then we're going to press this blue button over here that says create. Okay, so when you do this, you're going to get a white square in the middle of your space, and it's called an artboard. So this artboard is the space that we have to create our artwork. Anything that you are making that you want to be part of your final art piece needs to exist inside of the artboard. All of this empty gray space will not be included in your final design. It's just a space to build things, and then you can bring it over into the artboard. Okay. So we have to do one more thing before we can actually start making anything. So we have to come up here to Window and then find Workspace. And our workspace needs to be Essentials Classic. The reason why we're doing this is because it allows us more options and more tools, and your workspace will look the same as my workspace. Okay, so once you make sure that it's in Essentials Classic, then we're going to find our shape tool. So your shape tool is located right underneath your text tool. So if you click and hold on to that guy, you're going to see all of the different options that we have for shapes. Okay, so in order to see these all the time, I'm going to pop this menu out. I'm going to have a pop out menu. So if you click on the little arrow that's all the way to the right, then you're going to have a permanent pop out menu here so we can see all of our options. So this white background is not what color our actual background is going to be. So we're going to put in a square there. So if we just click once with our square, we know that our artboard that we created is 12 inches by 12 inches. So we're just going to make our background square, 12 by 12. Okay, and then you'll notice that if I stay in my square tool, it just makes more squares, right? So now I have to find my selection tool. So my selection tool is on my keyboard, the hotkey for it is V as in Victor. So if I switch to that tool, then I can move this background over, and then we want to change the color. So there's a couple ways you can change the color. The first way is to look under your properties panel for the fill and the stroke. So if you click on that fill button, then you get a bunch of presets and you can pick whichever one of those you want. So maybe I want it to be like a greenish color, right? And then I don't want to have I don't want to have a stroke. The stroke is the outline. So if you click on this outline button, you do have other options here for deciding if you do want to have a stroke on your shape. But if you want to get rid of your stroke, click on the one that has the red slash through it. Okay, so if we go back and look at my example, you guys can see that there's a particular color scheme that I was sticking to. And most of the time, when you're creating something, if you want it to be more professional looking, it's easier to make it look more professional if you stick to a limited color palette. So the first thing that we're going to do is make a color palette here. So we're going to go ahead and make some more squares. The way that I just moved my artboard right now, I held my space bar so that it could turn into a hand, and then I moved my artboard so I could work in that gray space. Another thing that might be helpful to you is zooming in and out. So if you need to zoom in or out, you can hold Alt on your keyboard and then scroll with your mouse, and it'll zoom out and zoom in. Okay, so in order to make this color scheme, I'm going to make a couple more boxes. So I'm going to go with my square tool again, and again I'm going to click once, and this time I'm going to make a 1 inch by 1 inch box. So I'm going to go ahead and just make two colors that I enjoy, right? So the first one needs to be a darker color, so maybe I'll just make this a darker version of this teal. And then I'm going to make a copy of this square. So instead of having to click again and enter one by one, I'm just going to make a copy of this guy. And the easiest way to make a copy is to hold Alt, and you'll see that your mouse turns into like a double mouse when you hover it over the shape. And so once it does that, you can click and drag, and then you'll have an additional shape, right? It made a copy of it really quick. So now that I have my dark shape up here, I'm going to make this one lighter. So if I double click on the square that's underneath my tools, that'll bring me my color picker. Okay, so in my color picker, I can change this color. So maybe I want it to be like a yellowish green, but a really light yellow green. Okay, so now I have my dark color and my light color, and now I'm going to use the blend tool to automatically make a color scheme that I could use. So I'm going to click and drag over both of those squares, and then I'm going to go up to Object, Blend, and then Blend Options, because I want to change the options for the blend tool first. So on this pop-out menu, you're going to change this from smooth color to specified steps. And then the number of steps that it has here is going to be the number of colors that it's going to make for you. Okay, so I want to make 4 additional colors so that I have 6 colors to choose from because I have 2 already, right? So I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And I'm going to do object, blend, and this time I'm going to do make. If you wanted to do a hotkey for this, it would be Alt Control B for blend. And now I automatically have different colors in here that I can choose from. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to change this background color to be more of a mid-tone that's in the color scheme that I just created, I would click on that shape using my selection tool, or V as in Victor on my keyboard. And then I would find my eyedropper tool. Okay, my eyedropper tool looks like a little eyedropper, but you could also press the letter I on your keyboard. And then I could just decide which color I want to make this guy, right? So I want it to be kind of like a mid-tone. So I'm going to make it that like middle green. Maybe I could even make it the lighter one. I don't know. I'll keep it with that one. Okay. So from here, now that I have a background and I have a color scheme to choose from, I'm going to start building our little castle with the shapes. So again, if we look at my example, we've kind of have like just a regular house looking thing first, and then I added a bunch of towers on top of that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with just a regular square. So this time, instead of clicking and dragging, or sorry, instead of clicking once, we're going to click and drag. So instead of clicking once, we're going to click and we're going to drag. So I'm going to do this sort of a situation, and we're making the base of our house here. You'll notice that after you make a shape, it's going to continue to stay highlighted. And so if I wanted to change the color of this shape using my eyedropper tool, I could just go directly to my eyedropper tool by pressing the letter I, and then change this to a different color so that my castle or house will stand out against the background. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to my selection tool. So if I wanted to change the general size of this square, I could change the width or the height by dragging on individual pieces that are in the middle. Or I could go to a corner and I could change 2 dimensions at once. So I could change everything that's in relation to that corner. But let's say that I wanted to make it tapered, right? Like if you look at my house right here, the square kind of like gets smaller towards the bottom, which means it gets tapered. So if I wanted to taper the ends here, what I would need to do is use my direct selection tool. Okay, so my direct selection tool is the white arrow. The way that you get to it is by pressing the letter A on your keyboard if you don't want to click on it. And so what this is going to allow me to do is select individual points and move those individual points. So everywhere that you see a little blue square, that is a point that you can manipulate. So we're going to go ahead and click on that point and then drag it towards the center. So first I have to click on it to select it, and then I can drag it to the middle to adjust it. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to use more shapes. So we're going to go in here and we're going to try to make a triangle. So if we look at our example again, we just made a tapered square for the bottom part. And then the top up here you can see is a triangle. So when we do that, there's a couple ways you can make a triangle, but the way that we're going to do it so that it's the most efficient and that we can edit it in particular ways is we're going to use the polygon tool. So the polygon tool is the 4th tool in over here. And then when you do that, you can click and drag again. However, I'd like you to go ahead and hold shift while you're doing that. So that way it'll be flat on the bottom, right? So go ahead and hold shift. It'll keep perfect proportions of a polygon instead of being like squished in one way or the other. And so you're going to go ahead and make your polygon. And then after that, you're going to notice that on the right-hand side, there's a little diamond. Okay, that diamond is located on the bounding box. So whenever you have a shape that has a blue kind of highlight shape around it, that's called a bounding box. And sometimes that bounding box has different ways that you can edit the shape, like hidden inside of it, right? So right here, if we look at this little diamond, there's going to be a plus sign and a minus sign next to each other. So what that means is you can drag it up to take away points, and you can see we get like a square and a triangle inside of here. Or you could drag that little diamond down to add points to your polygon. So it kind of depends on what you want, but it is an editable shape. So we're going to go ahead and drag that all the way up so that we can make a triangle. And then we're going to move this guy over here. So remember, the hotkey for your move tool is V as in Victor. And we're going to drag this guy down. And then we can resize it. We don't have to keep the same proportions. So I'm actually going to make this look a little chunky. Like I'm going to make it kind of spread out and flat so we get something that looks like this. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do, again, if we look at our example, is we're going to make some towers. Okay, so we're going to make this tower together, and then you guys are going to have time to add your own details because your castle does not need to look exactly like mine. You can add your own details as long as you're practicing the same skills. So let's go ahead and make another rectangle. So this time it's going to be more stretched out. And then again, we're going to use our direct selection tool, or you could press the letter A on your keyboard. And then we're going to click once on the anchor point that we'd like to move, and then we can drag it to make it tapered, right? Another thing that you could do is you could actually change 2 anchor points at once. So if I wanted to move both of these anchor points at the bottom, for example, to make it longer, I could click and drag over both of them. And then now when I select and move them, they move as one unit, and I can kind of like tilt it one way or the other. So go ahead and make whatever you want your first tower to be like. And then you could also stretch it evenly by going back to your regular selection tool. And then we're going to place that on the roof there. Okay, so the next thing we're going to make that's going to make it look more like a castle is going to be these little parts here. So on like a real castle, those are called turrets. So basically what that means is that like people would hide right there and then like use a bow and arrow to shoot at people, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, take our rectangle and make a little like top to this tower. And then we're going to make ourselves a rectangle that's going to shoot up from that. So we're going to go up this direction. And then I always, as a designer, am looking for ways that I can work smarter and not harder, right? So like I don't want to have to make a whole bunch of those squares. I just want to copy it and then do something on my keyboard that automatically copies it with the same distance, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with my selection tool again. I'm going to hold Alt so that I can make a copy, right? I don't want to do Control C, Control V because that's too many buttons. I can just hold one button, hold Alt, and drag that guy over. And then if I'm happy with that spacing, then I'm going to go ahead and let go. And then I'm going to do Control on my keyboard and then D for duplicate because I want to duplicate that action. And then it's just going to continue making those all the way over. But if you guys pay attention, do you see how these actually go up? That's because the first time that I made that copy, I didn't move it exactly to the right. I moved it to the right and up. So when I duplicated the action, it went to the right and up, to the right and up each time. So I'm going to actually undo that. And the way that you undo something is by doing Control Z. And then I'm going to try again. So I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to drag this guy over. And then if I like that spacing, I can do Control D. And then now that I did it in a straight line, it's going to go all the way over, right? So I do need to extend this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that one. And then I'm going to drag it over so it extends this way. And then if I zoom out again by holding Alt and scrolling with my mouse, this looks a little bit like off kilter, right? Like it's too far to one direction. So I'm actually going to select all of these and then scoot them over. Or potentially, I could also make it smaller. So if I'm going to make more than one shape smaller at one time, I need to hold the shift key. So that way my proportions are going to stay the same. If I do not hold the shift key, then the proportions could get messed up and then it's not going to look as nice, right? Okay, so there's one tower. So let's say, if I look back at my example, that I just want a tower on the other side, going the other direction, okay? So in order to do that, instead of making a brand new rectangle, I'm just gonna copy this one, but I'm actually gonna flip it, okay? So I'm gonna select it, and then right-click, transform, reflect. Right-click, transform, reflect. And then when I do that, I want to make sure that it's flipping vertically because I want it to flip on a vertical axis, not a horizontal axis. And then I'm going to make sure that I also press copy. Okay. I don't want to press OK because then it's just going to flip the one that's already there. I want to press copy so that it gives me a new one. So now I can drag that guy over here, and then it doesn't need to be the same exact size. So now that I have a new square, I can just stretch it to be whatever size I want it. Maybe I could even like edit the rotation. So when you're going to rotate something, you just hover over the edge of that bounding box until you see an arrow that points in two directions. And then when you see that arrow that points in two directions, that means that you are rotating that shape, right? So I can go ahead and turn this whatever way I want. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another triangle on top of here, but this time we're gonna edit the corners of the triangle to be different. So again, I'm gonna hold Alt while dragging to make a copy of the previous triangle instead of making a brand new shape. And then I'm gonna edit the size of this so that it makes more sense on top of this tower. And then if you guys look really close, on the corner of this triangle, there's a little circle. And when I hover over that circle, I get a little like curve next to my mouse. And that's telling me that if I pull on that circle, that I could change the corners to be rounded. So if I click on this and I pull, it's gonna round all of those corners all at once. If I pull too far to the center, it's just gonna make a circle, right? So I don't want it to be a circle. I want it to be a triangle with rounded edges. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that guy back out. So that way I get something that'll look like this. Okay, so from here, you can use those same skills to add your windows. So if we look over here, all of these windows that are like rectangles, I did those the same exact way that I did the tower, right? So let's this time use the rounded rectangle tool. So if I click on this guy, this rounded rectangle, and then click and drag, let's go ahead and also change the color so that way we'll be able to see it on top of our castle. So in order to change the color, remember you have to have the shape selected, and then you're going to go to your eyedropper tool or the letter I on your keyboard, and then you're going to choose which color you'd like it to be. So I'm going to make this one the lightest color on my color wheel, or my color scheme that I made. And then now we're going to use our direct selection tool again. So remember that's the letter A on your keyboard. And then you can do this a couple ways, okay? So you could either click once on just one of these anchor points and then drag it to change the size of that shape. Or because it's a rounded rectangle, there's actually like two anchor points here. So in order to edit both of those anchor points at the same time, I'm just gonna click and drag over both of them. And then now if I click on one of those anchor points, they're both gonna move together. So if I zoom back out, you can see that I just moved that one side instead of moving the whole thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that again on the other side and make myself this distorted rectangle here. And then I need to go back to my regular selection tool to move it. So I'm going to press on the V as in Victor, move this guy over. And then remember, if you want to keep the same proportions, that you need to hold shift, right? So if I change this size without holding shift, I can squish it and stretch it, and it's going to look weird, okay? But if I don't want that to happen, then I'm going to hold shift, and then the proportions are going to stay the same, right? So you have lots of different options here. You could make yourself like a cool circle window. If you wanted to use the star tool, when you click and drag with the star tool, you can use your up and down arrows to add more or less points. So maybe I want a star tool like this to be a window. So maybe we can like make this guy smaller. I can put him like up here or something, right? So you can add whatever shapes you want as windows. But let's go ahead and make the door, the entryway together. So in here, you can see on my entryway that the bottom of it is square and the top of it is rounded, okay? So we're gonna, again, use our direct selection tool for that. So if I come over here and make a square that's about the size that the door is gonna be, then I'm going to go back to my direct selection tool by pressing the letter A on my keyboard. And then I'm going to select these little round things. So the same way that we made the triangle rounded, so up here, the same way that this is rounded, we're going to do that with our direct selection tool on this rectangle. But we're going to select only the corners that we want to edit and not all of them, right? So I'm going to click once on this circle, and I'll know that it's highlighted because it'll be bold. And then I'm going to hold Shift and click on the other circle. So now I have 2 circles that are selected and 2 that are not. So now I can drag those guys towards the center. And now I have a rounded top to my entryway, my doorway. So I can go ahead and scoot that guy over here, hold Shift and make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so there we go. So after you make it smaller to fit, then you can start adding your own details. So if we go back and look at my example, I've got lots of towers that come off the top here. Some of them are smaller, some of them are larger. Some of my windows have like the separating pieces. So I just did those with like small rectangles. So if I go with my rectangle tool and I make sure that I'm using that dark green color, then I could make just a really thin rectangle and separate those windows, right? Okay, so from here, let's go ahead and start putting it onto the background. So what I have to do is I need to select everything so that I can move it all together. So I'm gonna click and drag over all of my shapes. And when I did that, you can see I have this big bounding box that has all of the shapes. However, I accidentally also selected my background. And I don't want to select my background. I just want to have my castle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard and I'm going to deselect that by clicking on it. So now you can see that bounding box only goes on my castle and nothing else. So I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift to make sure my proportions don't get messed up. I'm going to put that castle so that it fits on my artboard. Okay, so one important thing to point out here is that when I made my triangle smaller, the curve that I decided on stayed the same, right? So now that the triangle is smaller, the curve looks bigger. And in some cases, that might turn into a circle. So you're going to need to go in there and zoom in and fix that. So you got to drag this little circle guy back out so that way it'll be the curve that you want again. Okay, so I do have at least one more tool that I need to show you. So we're going to learn how to use the Pathfinder tool. So if we look at this example, you can see that the half moon circle has a part that's like cut away in the middle, right? So I'm going to show you guys how to do that using Pathfinder. So we're going to come to the side over here and we're going to make a circle or an ellipse, right? So if you want to make a perfect circle, when you're clicking and dragging, hold Shift, and it will always be a perfect circle. And you'll know that because it has those pink guidelines on it, right? So I'm going to make this guy just like that. And then I'm going to make myself an additional circle that's more squished. So this time when I'm clicking and dragging, I am not holding Shift, and I'm going to make it a little bit more squishy. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool, which is the letter V on my keyboard. And I'm going to select both of those. So you can see now where they overlap and where I could potentially have a cool crescent moon situation, right? So inside of here, the next thing we're going to do after they're both selected is we're going to look in our properties panel for our Pathfinder tool. Okay, so that's going to be over there. All right, so over here on Pathfinder, there's a couple things we can do. The first button is just going to merge shapes together. So if I click on that button, then both of those shapes are going to become one shape now. Okay, now in order to undo something, you just do Control Z, and then I can try again and I can do a different action. So this second button in is going to minus front. It's going to take away the circle that's in the front. And that's when we're going to get our crescent moon, right? So if I do that and I don't like the curve that I got, I can fix that in one of two ways. I can either do Control Z, and then I can edit just this circle to maybe be a little bit wider so that the crescent moon isn't so squishy, and then highlight both of them and use Pathfinder again. The second way I could do that is by using my direct selection tool. So I can go with the letter A on my keyboard and click once onto one of those anchors, and then I can move it around wherever I want to move it to make it a different shape. Okay, so the other thing that we can do is, if we select both of these, is we can leave behind the overlapped part, right? So if I click on this guy, it's going to leave behind the parts that were overlapping. And then the last thing that I can do with this is that I can cut out the middle. So if I click on this guy, it's going to exclude the middle part and give me two parts that were just on the outsides. All right. Now, there's a whole lot that you can do with that. There's a whole lot of cool stuff that you can create using the Pathfinder tool. So when you guys have your own time to add details to this castle, you can use the Pathfinder tool, you can use the direct selection tool, and you can overlap shapes and group them together. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do with this, and I expect you to add details that are exciting for you, right? So for me, what was fun was making different types of stars and the moon and different shapes for my windows. I even did a reflection of the door with a cat inside of it. So this cat that I made it using just the simple shapes that I taught you how to use. And then I reflected it horizontally, so that way it could be a reflection. And then I used my direct selection tool to stretch it so that it would look like a shadow, right? So you guys have a lot of stuff that you can do to add your own details. I am expecting at bare minimum that yours should have as many details as my example, right? If not more. So that way you guys can practice the tools that we used. So when you're done, you got to make sure of two things. First, you have to save it as an Illustrator file so that you can get back to it. So the way that we're going to do that is File, Save As. And I'd like you to save it in two different ways. I want you to save it on the computer, and I also want you to save it in the cloud. So when you save it on the computer, remember we talked about having good file management, okay? So you must always save in your documents folder. And we together, when we talked about file management, we made a folder that was specifically for our class, right? So for me, you can see the folder that I'm saving this in is the 23-24 CNUSD school year, because that's where I'm putting all my stuff for this year. So you can see that my name of my document, again, is my last name underscore and then title of what we did. So we made a shape castle, and then we're going to go ahead and save that. And then this is going to pop up and you're just going to say, okay. And then we're also going to file save as to our Creative Cloud. So in your Creative Cloud, you could also make a folder. That icon looks like this, a little folder with a plus sign. And you can name that new folder whatever you want. So that way you can find it. It should be a professional name. Like it should be something that if I came to look at it, you wouldn't be embarrassed. Okay. And then again, for saving here, you press that blue save button, okay? Now, if you were finished, like if this design were finished, I need to export it. in order to turn it into the Google Classroom. So I'm going to do File, Export, Export As. And then I need to make sure that this says PNG on this drop-down menu. And then on that PNG, I'm going to click Use Artboards. So what that's going to do is it's going to not include anything that's in this empty space. So the color scheme that we made, the practice shapes that you had, it's not going to include any of that, okay, which is good because all we want is our artwork. So you're going to click Use Artboards, and then you're going to click Export. And when you do that, it's going to ask you what you want the quality to be. Please change the resolution to be high resolution rather than screen, and then make sure you press open. All right, so that was our first assignment. Remember that I am expecting you to make something that is at the very least as detailed as my example here. So have fun using the Shapes tool, and I'll see you again next time.